Well, let's go back to Samantha now, because following the extremely high-profile coverage of the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein grooming and sex trafficking scandal, you told We Need to Talk About why you think some cases get more attention than others.
I think it's a simple case of what class the victims come from. We're talking about in the UK, in Rotherham, Rochdale, and in my own hometown of Telford, young working class white girls from backgrounds not too dissimilar to my own. I was under social services from the age of 15. I flitted in and out of different children's homes, emergency accommodations, etc., etc. I worked 3 jobs just to get by. You know, I was living, by all means, below the poverty line. And I definitely got a sense of being ignored and being overlooked and being almost villainized for the crime of being a young woman without protection from their family or other means. Social services in towns like Telford failed young people. They suggested that it was our own promiscuity or our own background or our lack of education that caused the abuse. As recently as 2019, 17,800 cases of suspected CSE were reported by local authorities in England and Wales. This is not a problem that has gone away. Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein have been highlighted as a paedophile grooming ring, but the reason why the world seems so rapt and so eager to pay attention to it is because the perpetrators and the victims come from this jet-setting, high-stakes lifestyle that none of us have ever experienced, or at least I haven't. You know, private jets and private islands and millions of dollars being traded for sexual favours. This isn't something that many of us will be able to relate to, and it's almost been mythologized. Whereas if you go down the street on one of the estates in my hometown, you'll see it in action. This isn't something that is going away. This is something that is still a massive problem for young girls in areas like mine, but it's being ignored simply because the victims aren't newsworthy or headline grabbing.
Yeah, it's almost as if there's this sense, isn't there, that, you know, they're not worth believing or not worth stretching any sort of fibre to protect. Well, listen, also joining us is Maggie Oliver, who's a former police detective and founder of the Maggie Oliver Foundation, which provides support to adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Maggie, great to have you on board. I mean, do you agree there with what Samantha has said, that, you know, very often that when vulnerable girls are from a working class background or from a sort of hectic background, that they're sort of passed over, they're not really taken seriously, and people aren't doing enough to protect them?
Yeah, you know what, Alex, your young speaker there, Samantha, she really, I'm not needed because she has said it all. You know, for such a young woman to have such understanding of the issues, it actually makes me feel that all the batting on about it I've done over the years has found a place to land, because Samantha clearly understands the issues behind this. You know, this case has grabbed the international headlines because of the celebrity, because of the jet set lifestyle, because it is interesting to look at the other world of these people. But in towns and cities like Telford, like Rochdale, like Rotherham, we have sexual abuse on an industrial scale still. And the victims there are being blamed. They are being judged. They're frightened to come to the authorities. And at the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we support victims who are being fobbed off. We advocate for them. They are not powerless, but the criminal justice system is a very complex system to navigate. This case, I mean, Prince Andrew has got unlimited resources to access lawyers, legal advice. They're not looking at the evidence. Young girls in, say, Rochdale, the case that I resigned over, you know, they are powerless. They don't have access to lawyers. One of the young girls in Rochdale was actually put on the indictment as a madam at the age of 15, and yet the mainstream media have never reported it because it isn't sexy. It doesn't grab the headlines in the same way. But could you imagine, for instance, the daughter of, say, Prince Andrew being accused of being a madam, not being arrested, never having legal advice, not having access to a solicitor, and having potentially a whole life destroyed for something that she had no opportunity to defend herself. It very much is a class attitude, them and us. And these victims in towns like Telford that Samantha's talking about, they are very often powerless, voiceless, fobbed off, and they are an easy target for the system to blame.
I mean, it's horrific when you think of the industrial scale of the sexual abuse against vulnerable young women going on in these towns, and yet we're still in the situation where this is being perpetuated over and over again. Do you get the impression that when it comes to the hierarchy of rights, that if you happen to be a working class woman, basically you're the bottom of the pile?
100%, Alex, 100%. That's why if you have any victims watching your program now who feel that they are being squashed by the system, approach the foundation and we will try to help. You do have a right to review. There are paths you can take to challenge decisions that are made that you don't agree with, but it is not an easy route to follow. And again, as Samantha's quite rightly said, all too often, the victims are frightened by the system. They are actually criminalised themselves as a victim of abuse. Even the young girl I was talking about, Amber, the authorities then tried to take her children away from her based on the fact that she had secretly been named as an abuser on an indictment with no opportunity to protect herself. The system is completely broken. And, I'm very grateful to GB News because you do keep the spotlight on this issue, but very little, there are very few mainstream media channels that do that. And I think that by talking about it, by bringing it all into the open, that is the way to move things forward. There is still a long, long way to go. The losers are always young victims, and they are predominantly from difficult backgrounds, from working class backgrounds.
Yeah, well, let's bring Samantha back into the conversation, because earlier on, Samantha, you said that you have yourself gone through sexual harassment, sexual assault. How comfortable were you with going to the authorities? Did you report it? Did you feel like you got the reception that you needed and the support that you needed?
Well, I was abused from age 5 to age 14, and I didn't expose my abuse until age 16. I told one of the social workers in my supported accommodation what I had experienced, and suddenly a flurry of legal action kicked in that I was not prepared for and had not asked to incite. In fact, I begged my social worker to let me take it at my own pace. And this led to when, detectives knocked at my door from the CSE department, I simply didn't know how to respond. I wanted to refuse to speak to them because I feared it. I felt as though I would somehow be criminalised. As many young girls who have experienced sexual abuse, I wasn't a victim of CSE myself, but I experienced sexual abuse for nearly a decade. I feared that I would be made to feel as though it were my fault, and that me coming forward in later life meant that somehow my testimony would be denigrated. And as with, 99.6% of cases, 98.6% of cases, mine ended up having no further action taken. And this led to years and years of distrust in the system. Even now, I've had an ISVA, I've had sexual abuse therapy that I haven't been able to engage with properly because up until recently, I wasn't ready, simply because my case wasn't handled in the way that I would have hoped for it to be handled. And I have spoken to other survivors, I've spoken to other young women who have been in similar positions, and we all share the same story of feeling as though we are mistreated and swept under the rug by local authorities and social services who simply don't care and don't have the time or the resources or the energy to treat us as people rather than cases. I know just in my own experience, I've known people who have been told by social workers, if you were physically abused, why were there no bruises? These sorts of attitudes continue to perpetuate a cycle of victim blaming among young women, young working class girls who have nowhere else to turn to. And when they do seek support, they're smacked down. My own MP, Lucy Allen, who is an absolutely fantastic advocate for survivors of CSE, she's doing work on it still to this day. She spoke to me about how authorities and police services labelled young women as troublemakers or as criminals themselves, as was mentioned in the case of Amber, for daring to speak up about the abuse that they experienced. what sort of message does this send out to young girls who are currently experiencing abuse? Does it suggest that they can feel safe to come forward to social services or to the police? Or does it suggest they will be criminalised and branded troublemakers or not worth the time and energy because somehow they caused the abuse that they experienced?
Samantha, you are, honestly, it's making me quite emotional listening to you, because
can I just come in?
You're incredible, Samantha, and thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much as well for joining us, Maggie. Keep up the fantastic work, both of you, because you're amazing advocates for young women, and we need women like you out there in the world we live in today.